Welcome, everyone, to another episode of Animated Animators, the podcast that's a little bit more like a Twitter thread, but with less Elon Musk acting like a 51-year-old middle schooler. Nick Arbeiter is back, but we have another addition today. That is Chris Morgan, a former colleague of mine and a current one of Nick. Chris, I don't want to step on your toes too much for this introduction, and like mislabel your role. So why don't you just say a little bit about yourself, what your current role is, what your like responsibilities are, and then I'm going to badger you with like 50 more questions.
Cool. That sounds great. Yeah. So my name's Chris Morgan. I am currently an animation supervisor at PlayStation Studios Visual Arts. My duties are to basically lead my teams of animators and make sure that they're doing well and the clients are happy. That's the very much abridged version of my roles and duties.
That sounds really, it's all right. That's okay.
He's got to keep me in line.
It's fine. Yeah. I make sure Nick doesn't mess up too much, basically.
So when I said former colleague, Chris and me and Nick worked at Steamroller Studios together a few years ago, and Chris and Nick obviously worked together at PlayStation. I'm not gonna say I miss you guys. I miss
I'll say it
every day.
I miss you, man.
I miss you.
That's not really the reason we started the podcast. It's just an excuse to talk to each other. It's definitely not that. It's certainly not that.
I guess I was confused.
I misunderstood.
That's why I got so dressed up. Chris, I'm just going to start peppering you with questions. But why don't you give us a brief sort of summary of how you ended up in animation in general, and then sort of your career path once you got into it, from studio to studio or job to job.
Yeah, for sure. So when I actually graduated high school, like most kids, I had no flipping idea what I wanted to do. I knew that I wanted something with art. I had always loved art. I'd always been doodling, drawing, painting, everything, sculpting. And I had a love for cars, automobiles in general. So I ended up going to school up in New England for auto body for a semester because I wanted to do like custom paint jobs on cars. I thought it was a cool sort of meshing together of two things that I loved. And then 1 month, my professor basically told us that like by painting cars for a living, you shave like 20 years off of your life from all the chemicals you inhale. So I started looking elsewhere for obvious reasons, because being alive is pretty cool at times. Yeah, right. But I said at times, okay. But yeah, so I ended up, I think it was like a Game Informer magazine or something like that. I saw like a little side page ad for Full Sail. And I was like, wait, that's right. People make games. Like people get paid to do that. And it was something that I had never really thought of in the past. Like I played games like a crazy person, but like having that realization that like, oh, you can go to school for this, you can learn how to do this, you can get paid to do this, it sort of sparked a little bit of a fire in me. So I flew down to Florida toward Full Sail, knew that's where I wanted to go. Went through the course, busted my butt. Nate, not an easy course to go through, but we're here. And then was some of the worst years of my life shortly after that, because it was 3 years of trying super, super hard to find a job, not being able to find anything, not really getting any bites whatsoever. And I did some freelance here or there, but little jobs that actually my parents were down visiting, and they were like, hey, you remember that music video you did? I was like, yeah, but I wish that I didn't remember that. So thanks for bringing that up. But first jobs, first gigs, stepping stones. So that was a tough 3 years. And then I had a friend of mine that I went to Full Sail with contact me with a position at a military simulation company here in Florida. So I went there and I worked there for a couple years. And then I moved back up north because we had an illness in the family and we wanted to be up with family. And I got a small job at a really small company called Killer Minnow, and it was a lot of fun. And it was definitely more in line with kind of what I wanted to be doing. Like we were doing some animated stuff for Lego for like their web-based things, and it was definitely a step in the right direction from military sim, which was fun in its own ways and very rewarding, but not kind of where I wanted to be. as some small companies do, they unfortunately went under, and we all got laid off, which was a bummer. And at that point, I was kind of just frustrated with the career, and I'd worked so hard for those 3 years, and I finally had something solid at the military simulation place. And even though it wasn't what I wanted to do, like, should I have stayed there? And I was just frustrated. So I basically up and quit. I was done with animation. And a friend of mine owned a tattoo shop up in Connecticut, and he offered me an apprenticeship there for free, which normally is super expensive. So I hopped right on that because I thought it would be awesome. Really saw myself doing that until I realized that in Connecticut it's like a seasonal job because people all get tattooed in the summer, and then you have like 6 months of winter basically where you make no money. And I was like, oh, this sounds like it sucks. But I, in that time, kind of realized I got back to my like traditional art roots, which was great because I needed that because I'd missed it for a long time. And it sort of reignited my passion for animation and 3D in general, and made me realize that I really missed it and I wanted to get back into it. So I ended up finding a teaching job down in Florida again, where I taught high school seniors, actually all grades really, 3D animation, which was awful. It was absolutely terrible. It was the worst thing I've ever done. It was honestly like I had no support, and like the first day they're like, yeah, here's your room, none of these computers have any software on them, good luck. So it was crazy. But it got to the point where my wife was like, I'm just never going to ask you how work was because I know. I could tell it's written all over your face. But while I was teaching, I ended up meeting the people from Steamroller because they did like a little chat at Full Sail. And one of my friends was like, you should go, you should meet these people. So I did. We hit it off pretty well, and they offered me like a part-time gig at the time. So I was basically getting up at like 6 something in the morning to go teach high school. Then after school, I would drive like an hour and a half north to where the studio was, and I'd work there until like 10, 11 o'clock, and then I'd drive back home after that. So I did that for a little bit. Don't quote me on how long, but I think it was probably a month or two until they finally offered me a full-time position there. That was pretty great because they definitely at Steamroller were much more in line with where I wanted to be. And then I was there for almost 6 years, and then I got hit up by another fellow alumni of Full Sail from PlayStation, and he offered me the job.
From all of that, I'm only taking away that tattooing is a seasonal job. I did not.
It's crazy.
This is the
information it's funny too because
we need to give to people.
Yeah. But like in Florida, it's obviously, that tattoo season is longer, but it's funny because people are like, I should get a tattoo in the summer because I'm going to go to the beach and people will see it. But that's literally the worst time to get tattooed. It's the exact opposite of what you should do.
Because of like the healing or something?
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah.
Both Nick and I have talked about this in previous episodes, but I don't know anyone who has like a straightforward path into games.
Oh no, there's no
animation.
such thing as a straightforward path, honestly.
Yeah,
there's
I think it's as rough as it was for you. I'm sure some people find it comforting to know that everyone kind of goes through most people go through some sort of a moment where they're like, do I really want to do this? Do I need to focus on something else? I have to pay the bills. So what can I do in the interim? And
every morning when I wake up, that's I have to fight that feeling.
Oh, and it doesn't change. I mean, that imposter syndrome thing doesn't change even at a supervision level. It's still there. Like I get asked questions, I'm like, shit, am I gonna tell them the wrong thing? Am I gonna put these like blossoming animators in the wrong direction on the wrong path? But everything works out. Hopefully, we'll see. 20 years down the road, if I find out that all the people that I worked with quit the industry because of guidance that I gave them,
there are a lot of rules in animation, but then as you work more and more, you find out that everyone's kind of just fumbling their way into their
art.
Current role.
It's art. Honestly, there's, we can say that there are rules and guidelines, but somebody will find a different way to do things, and it'll look just as good when it's done. And like we try to get these these sort of standardized ways of animating so that everybody can be on the same path and produce the same work in the same amount of time and get good, if you want to call it that. But like, there's so many different ways to do things, it's art.
Everyone has different strengths, and those different strengths play into your function and your role at a company.
As long as you're strong in something, right?
Yeah. It's difficult that your job is essentially subjective. Your work is subject to someone else's interpretation of it, and it's not like, yes, I did X, Y, or Z. It's up to them. It's like, oh well, but did you really hit that? Did you, and how we approach giving people notes is always different.
In my role, one of the most difficult things to do is I'm not just reviewing the animator's work for myself. Like, it's not what I want it to look like, it's what the client wants it to look like. And I have to understand that before I give the feedback to my animators, because I'm not trying to hit my bar, I'm trying to hit the client's expectation. You know what I mean? So that's a big thing that as a supervisor, you have to understand and have a firm grasp of, so that when you're giving your feedback, you're trying to build every animation up to that same level.
With the structure system the way that it is at PlayStation, Chris is reviewing things that like I've reviewed. So like whenever I'm reviewing something, I'm like, ooh, I hope I didn't miss anything, because Chris is gonna see it now, and then he's the soup, and he's like, you're always hoping for the approved message to come through your inbox, but whenever you don't, you're like, missed it. All right, I'll get it on the next one. So it's like, not only am I looking at, for my perspective, it's not only am I looking to do all those things, I'm also looking to make sure that I'm also watching myself doing that, as outside of myself. It's its own challenge that's fun, honestly, like hoping that I'm getting across what is necessary in all those other aspects when I'm not the final say. You know what I mean? Like making sure that I'm also maintaining that standard and catching everything.
You mentioned something that that I wanted to touch on too, because you said like taking a step outside and kind of looking at stuff. And I find that one of the most important skills, or one of the skills that I appreciate the most from being a supervisor, is when I work on an actual animation task, which unfortunately is not very often, but when I do, I am able now to take a step back and look at it as if it isn't my work, because the majority of my job is looking at other people's work and reviewing. Like if I'm doing my own thing, I can take that step back and critique it as if it was somebody else's, which allows me to see more that can be improved upon than when I'm just kind of in the thick of it and actually animating. Like having that moment to be like, okay, I'm going to send it in for review, quote unquote, and then step back and look at it. I feel like it helps me push myself too.
It's a completely different ball game when you're not necessarily answering to other people, but you're doing stuff, like you said, on behalf of some higher power. That it's not just as an animator, how does this look? How do the body mechanics look? Is this coming across the way that they want it to come across? And that's why I'm not a supervisor. It's an acquired skill, like everything.
I fumble through it until the client's like, yeah, this is good. I'm like, perfect, first try.
There is no giant book that says, here's how you do it. Welcome to your first day at PlayStation. Here's how to be a supervisor.
Yeah.
Because I would have bought it by now. So as a supervisor, is there something that, let's take the hypothetical new animator or someone looking for entry-level work. What is something that you're keeping an eye out for on their demo reel or their resume or something like that, I mean, in general, but also maybe now as a supervisor that you're looking for more, or you're not as concerned about?
It's funny because I feel like the answer you're looking for is like, what can people put in their demo reel to be noticed? And for me, it's less about the demo reel. Like I want to see consistent, solid work in a demo reel, but I also want to see that personality, because that's where that's where I get the most out of someone as far as knowing how they would be on my team. Because like right now, my team is fantastic. I love them so much. They're all super hungry. They all take critiques really well. They're all super fun. Like every Friday we have like what we call a hijinks meeting, where we literally are not allowed to talk about work. We just hang out, and lately we've been playing Overwatch 2. And it's, for me, that's super important to kind of keep that rapport with the team and make sure everybody knows that we work on video games and it should be fun. But like, I think that if your work is consistent and at least relevant for the job that you're applying for, then that will get me to get that first meeting with you and then see how you are personality wise. That's the most important thing for me.
I mean, that makes total sense in terms of like something that you might be looking for as a supervisor, because your job is not just the animation product, right? It's the health and wellness of your team and how they function as a whole. And is this person making the unit stronger, not just through their animation, but are they being a drag on the team, as a term that all the youth are using, a drag.
Such a drag, bro.
Just a square, you know, it's an audio medium, and I don't know why I'm doing the square.
But people can tell. I know they can tell. They
People
saw it.
could hear your hand motion.
This is the clip that's going on TikTok. I'm gonna tell you that.
You making the square?
Yeah. And then I'm gonna do the YouTube video shocked face for the thumbnail. So
Perfect.
just buckle up. He said what?
You won't believe it.
I think that this actually kind of ties into something I was thinking of earlier, which is it's partially soft skill and partially hard skill when it comes to taking critiques. And it ties into the personality note that you were talking about, because part of it is like, can you effectively apply the notes that a supervisor is giving you on your work, on your demo reel? But also, how do you handle that? Literally, how do you handle that interaction when the person's telling you notes? Are you paying attention? Are you looking at the screen? Are you like making eye contact? Are you writing down stuff? Which is a very divisive topic. Should you be writing down, yes or no? And Chris will give us the answer here.
The only
golden rule.
only. Yep.
But it's a soft skill that people it's acquired. It's not something that everyone has, but someone doesn't always say, you didn't get what I was going for. But I've heard 4,000 different versions of, you didn't get what I was trying to do a little bit more of a this, if that makes sense. And that's a red flag. Don't say that.
It's funny because you say that's a red flag, but there have been a couple moments where somebody's explained their like thought process to me. I'm like, okay, I could see where you're going, and then just kind of maybe nudge them a little bit, as opposed to like where I was going to put them originally. You know what I mean? Because if somebody, and it all depends on how you approach it. But if somebody says like, oh yeah, I was actually, the reason I did that is because I was thinking of doing this or whatever, and has a good reason behind it. Like I said, it's art. You know what I mean? So who am I to say like, no, you're absolutely wrong in how you're planning on doing your art? That's not the case always. You know what I mean? It's rarely the case. But like getting that information sometimes and then helping them kind of hone in on what they were going for is my job as a supervisor.
I was like to that point. I think that there's absolutely a preferred way coming from the perspective of your leadership team on how to approach that.
Oh yeah.
So like I'll use Chris and I as an example, because we've worked together for many years at this point. Where we've had several of these interactions where he'll give me a note and I'll be like, oh, I was trying to do this, and like literally, like, keep it like that. Keep it simple. Just coming from your leadership team to anybody that is, just working on their shot for someone else. Absolutely explain it, be concise, and be willing to listen to whatever happens after that. Whether or not, Chris, I love you. You're basically like 50-50 on whether or not it's like, oh, you know what? Okay, we'll try it. Like I'll give you like another day or two, try it like this, and we'll come back and see if it worked. If not, we'll try something else. Or I like what you're thinking, can't do it on this shot. You know what I mean? Like something like that.
And there's been so many times too, not just with you, Nick, but with plenty of other animators where I'm like, okay, I could see what you were going for, but it's not quite working. Exactly. So what can we do to get it working?
I got a lot of those from Chris. And this is why I want to drive this stuff home, or like explain this stuff, because I just absolutely was this kind of animator, and I was this kind of person where I took it very personally at the beginning, and I had like a very high opinion of my, like, where I was at. And I don't want to say like it was a rude awakening because it was handled really well. Chris, you're like a really good lead because you were able to effectively communicate those notes as to like, yeah, but why did you do, like, what was your reasoning behind this? And I would realize like, oh, I didn't really have one. I guess you're right that I just kind of did that. And that's not a valid reason. And that person sort of talks themselves into being like, ah, right, I guess I should have a plan, because then you are more willing to, look at their work and say, okay, well, I see what you were going for, but this.
Yeah. I will say, and not that this is a let's talk about Nate Thomas interview, but I, as your lead or soup, never felt any of that like ego from you at all. Like you for me were like one of the most ideal people to have on my team because you were so open and eager to absorb that information. So like if we're talking about like what makes you a good person on a team, like it's that, like be open and accepting to the feedback and write it down.
There you go. There it is. You heard it here. The alarm bells are going off.
If I am sitting at your desk and showing you something,
right,
and you're writing it down, I'm cool with that. And I will then take the time to be like, hey, just watch this for 1 second. Like if I need you to see what I'm doing, then I'll tell you like, hey, just take a peek at this so you know like where the tool is or whatever I'm doing. You know what I mean? But like write it down. I write stuff down all the time.
Yeah. And for what it's worth, I had turned a corner by the time that you were my lead, because at the beginning I wasn't that type of man. I was still like very focused on like, I want to be a senior. I've been animating for like X amount of years. I just had bad goals. Like I wasn't focused on becoming a better animator. And then I realized that that's the key, is just focus on the craft. And most things come from that.
So I'm going to say something super controversial right now.
I've done it. Go ahead.
Well, outside of just writing notes down, sorry, people. I didn't have any specific like lofty goals. I still kind of don't. Which I'm in a weird spot right now because I feel like I've achieved whatever goals I've had, because getting into this field, wanted to have fun, work on cool stuff, and be able to support myself and my family. Like those are my goals. Like I didn't get into this field and say like, I want to be an animation supervisor for PlayStation. Like that was never even something that I remotely thought about. And I don't know if that's a good thing, because I know people are always like, dream big, you know what I mean? Which I think is awesome. But like, I didn't have those goals to focus on outside of me just like wanting to get better at what I was doing. And I feel like that hasn't changed. Like I still want to continue to get better, but I'm not trying to get better for a specific lofty goal. I just want to get better. You know?
I get that, because like I'm kind of at a point too where I'm just like, I just want to get better at, I eventually want to wake up one day and be like, oh, you know what? I can do this thing. I am a good animator. Like that.
Oh, that won't happen.
Goal. It'll never happen. It's a horrible goal, but that is the goal that I have. And I think it's funny, like to kind of piggyback off of what you guys were like saying. It's like I never used to have like specific like positional goals. Like I want to be like a director or a soup or anything like that. But I always, at least when I was starting, I was always like, I want to go here, or I would like working here. And now, after having been in the industry for a little bit, and now that I'm a lead, it's kind of transitioned almost to be like more of like a project-based thing. So it's like, oh, that project would be fun to work on, or that style for that project. Yeah, exactly.
It's
like
the fun. Yeah.
Yeah.
That I would argue that is a lofty goal to have. And maybe you don't view it as lofty, but your goal is to do something that you're passionate about, and that is, and support yourself, which is, that's difficult. It's not
two contradicting things typically.
Yeah, two opposite ends of the spectrum. Yeah. But I think that ties back into what I was talking about earlier, where I was focused on a role. I was focused on a title, and I was missing the point. And really, it was focusing on the craft, but that also gave me more enjoyment. Like I was actually enjoying myself at work more. And Nick, to your point about like the project that you're working on, as a side note, I thought it's like every good animator, they're all at Blizzard, they're all at Insomnia, like they're all at these one, and there's people everywhere who are incredibly good at, maybe it's like a 10-man shop or something like that, or they're just working on a cool project with friends or a smaller studio or a startup or something like that. The future is pretty wide open when it comes to remote work. Yeah.
I kind of, you know what, you speaking just now reminded me that like one of the things that I enjoy most now is actually when you have like a group of friends, all of you are animators, you might all be at different levels, like soup, lead, junior, mid, whatever. You're all at different levels, but then all of a sudden a new short will come out that that those people worked on, and you'll be like, oh, I really like this shot, and they're like, oh, that was me, or oh yeah, I know the person that did that. And then like, or when it happens to you, they're like, this shot was really cool, it was like, hey, I did that. That to me has become one of the coolest things, like not just random people, but like other people that you respect that are also in your industry, like recognizing another thing that you enjoy doing.
Yeah,
like
super
that
fun.
that to me is like a new goal.
Yeah, it's crazy. Nick and I both have. Nick, did you sign an autograph too? We did, right? Both of us?
Have I? I don't think so.
Wait, weren't you there with me when we signed the autograph?
Maybe. What autograph
It was
were we
it
talking
was in
about?
North Carolina, in our visit to North Carolina when we were
I
in the game
was.
store.
You know what? I know what you're talking about. Yes, I
Yeah.
was there with you. I was
I
standing right
signed
next to
an
you.
autograph for working on Horizon. Like, come on.
It was,
That's the most
dude,
ridiculous thing.
It was the weirdest thing. I think both like no, I wasn't even wearing a Sony shirt. You
No.
were, and my Katie was.
Yeah.
And for anybody listening, I say my Katie because his significant
I have a
other
Katie
is also
too.
named Katie.
We all have Katies.
I only hang out with people whose spouses are named Katie. Nate is the exception.
Sorry, Alyssa.
We call her Katie.
Exactly. But yeah, like we were just standing there, and then all of a sudden, like they started talking about. I think it was right before the game came out, right? And everybody was talking about how hyped they were to play it.
Mm-hmm.
And then I think I was buying some cards, and they were like, "Can you sign something for our friend who's like super into the game and like isn't here right now and would love to meet you?" We were like, "Wait, are you kidding? Like what?"
Yeah, so taken
Sure?
back, but it's super cool at the same time. So
no, it's a unexpectedly good feeling, honestly.
Yeah.
I have a question for Chris and for Nick that I wanted to ask, and if we have the time to fit it in, I feel like editing it, I'll keep it in. What is a game you've played lately, not one that you worked on, where the gameplay animation sort of stuck out to you and you were like, oh, that's pretty cool, like that looks really good?
And I can't have worked on it even in any capacity?
No, I'm not that hard and fast on the rules. We got content to make, so
okay. I think overall animation looks everything. Like obviously I'm going to say Overwatch because the animation quality is amazing. But outside of that, Ghost of Tsushima was awesome. I love the animation in that game. I love the look of that game in every aspect.
I will second Overwatch for obvious reasons, as well as Ghost of Tsushima. But I feel like I need to mention the newest Ratchet and Clank, just because it played like a movie. Like it was gorgeous. It was stunning. Not just the animation, but everything in that was done at such a high caliber. It was super impressive playing through that game. It's so funny though, because like looking at that, like the majority of the consumer are gonna not even pay attention to it because it just works. You're climbing. It's such a mundane thing. But like us as animators and have like playing and working on games so much, like we look at that and we're like, oh my God, it's amazing how they do that. It's like, because we know how much goes into getting something like that to work properly.
If you see something that looks like, as an animator, when you see something that you're like, oh, that would be hard to animate, but somebody else did it right, you're like, oh,
good for you. Kudos.
Good job.
Not me yelling at Alyssa to come in here. Look at this climbing mechanic.
Look at this.
Okay.
Pet the dog. Look at he pet the dog.
My Katie gets so mad at me because she'll watch animated movies and call things out that aren't working. She's like, you ruined movies for me. I'm like, sorry. I'm sorry.
That is what we do here at Animated
Yep.
Animators. That is what our goal is.
We ruin things for our spouses.
Put that on that's the title of the episode for sure.
Absolutely.
I am writing that down. Chris, obviously, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Always a pleasure talking to you. And yeah, everyone, thanks for listening. And hopefully we're going to do another one of these, and we're going to have a wide variety of guests. You know,
I thought this was just to hang out with our friends. Like, oh, my bad.
Oh yeah, that too. No
I
tech.
thought we were doing this every Sunday, the three of us.